Hey there, folks. This is Misadventure, here today with the 14th developer diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. In this dev diary, I'm going to be bringing you all up to speed with many of the updates I've shared on the Hegemony Discord in the last couple of weeks, link in the description as usual. This won't be quite as extensive as the very, very long 13th developer dev diary when I had worked off camera for I think over a month on a huge number of regions and territories, but this is still a dev diary which will be for YouTube purposes, showing off 3 new regions, so let's go ahead and get into it. And those 3 regions are similar. They're all on the island of Crete, which I've now laid out the country borders for, along with the region and province borders for. I haven't done the population or city setup, and the area, as per Bronze Age, does still have the city design that looks like the Bronze Age style cities. So just ignore that. The goal of this dev diary is just to show off the country borders and talk a bit about what's going on the island of Crete in this mod. Let's go ahead and hop in here, let's hop into Athena, as I also want to show off that I've been working a little bit on setting up the custom characters. I've got a partially finished Pericles over here. I've been trying to get his name to display correctly. He does have a historical last name, which is not Timolid. That's the default Athena last name in Bronze Age for the starting leader. I'm trying to get the name set up correctly. I don't remember exactly what Pericles' real last name was, but it's in the code, and I'm trying to get it to display correctly. I've also not created his appearance yet, but I have managed to get his age correct. He is actually 64 years old in 431. That is historically accurate to what we believe his age would have been at the time. And he's going to look something a little like this, so his stats are also a work in progress. I've not set up his traits or anything like that. I've also tried with Pericles to set it up so that he starts off as the leader, not of the stratocratic faction of the democracy, but of the democratic voting bloc, which would be more accurate, I think, to Pericles' character. Pericles, actually, as a historical figure, is pretty interesting to sort of review and look up information about. There's an argument that he could be the leader of the stratocratic faction. If I'm able to code it so that this custom character on the campaign start screen is for the democratic faction, then I will. I may have to just have it be an in-game trigger when the game begins, when you're playing as anybody, where Pericles' custom character is set to be the leader of the democratic voting bloc. So it's actually kind of complicated to code this stuff. The way that the game handles faction assignment is a little strange, but anyways, let's just hop into Athena, because one other thing I wanted to show off, and this is also sort of partially finished, is I've also figured out how to code the country start events that pop up. So let me just start as Athena. And here we have the Athena pop-up, and what I'm going to do is that all of the interesting countries will have these pop-ups. I think that probably the best comparison for what this is going to be a bit like is, it actually, of all things, the Lord of the Rings mod for Medieval Total War 2, or Total War 2, or Total War Medieval 2, Medieval 2 Total War. There we go. Where in, I think it's called War of the Ring, in that mod, whenever you start a game as one of the nations in Middle-earth, for the first time, a very, very long lore text box pops up, and that's the idea here. Now, Athena and Lacedaemons will probably be the longest, because we've got the most information about them, and I don't think I'm going to necessarily read through this Athena text for this video, as it's still a little incomplete. There's basically the last 20% of it. I want to expand quite a bit further with specific information about the circumstances, about how the kind of the first Peloponnesian War started and all the events that happened in the kind of the 30-year period between Pericles coming to power and the beginning of the game. But this text box basically provides a ton of background information on the essentially last century of Athena's role in Hellas, which I think is going to be interesting to include here, just for someone playing as Athena to be able to read this. Of course, this is actually a sort of transposition of what was previously the heritage text for Deny, which I've moved into this box. And I'm going to have the heritage text boxes be used for something else. I might actually return to having the heritages in Hegemony include modifiers or include gameplay elements. Previously, I had thought that I would just have the heritage be a big kind of supermassive text block with all this information, but since I figured out how to make these events, I think I'll move that to here, because probably people would want to read that information when the campaign begins and not necessarily later, although I could see an argument for wanting to be able to look at it later. So let me know in the comments if you have any strong feelings about that. But yeah, this is basically the rough draft of what this will look like for Deny. Lacedaemon will, of course, have a similarly sized one, and then all the other interesting countries will also have these long text box that are just talking about the background lore. Something I've not created yet is that there's also going to be another text box that appears alongside this one, although this other text box will be for every single country, not just for the interesting countries. And that text box will be the sort of welcome to Hegemony text box that lays out some of the main changes of the mod and kind of gives you some directions about what's going on. So that's going to be modeled very much after the Welcome to Terra Indomita sort of text box that pops up in that mod, and some other mods as well have similar text boxes. So with that, another change I wanted to quickly show off, which might be a little controversial, is having to do with the way movement is displayed in the UI. Now, something that I've discovered is that even though I've gone to great efforts to have the date displayed in the BCE format, as I think that, in this time period, they were not using the AVC or AUC system. That's a Roman calendar system. So displaying the dates in the sort of counting down BCE style really does feel appropriate. But one problem I was having was that although the date in the top right displays like that, no problem, that's a well-known and easy change to have made, which obviously is in place here, the interface for this game is hard-coded to display the AVC sort of counting update. And so the AVC equivalent to the 431 BCE is around the 300s AVC, which if you think about the actual timeline is actually correct if we're thinking about when the AVC calendar would be at. However, those AVC dates would, I think, be disorienting and confusing, as I'm choosing to not display the AVC dates up here. So for moving units around, and if you've seen in previous Dev Diary videos, when I've clicked to move units around, that date system has displayed. So the problem is that in this game's code, I have tried quite a bit to find a way to change how this is displayed, whether that would be to display the BCE dates, which is in the code in a form that you'd think you could change it to, but that didn't work, or display it as days remaining, the counting down days remaining, so that it's not tied to the AVC date. That also actually didn't work, despite seeming to be something that should have worked. So my approach here is actually going to be quite a interesting interface change, which is I basically removed the arrival date sort of mechanic altogether. So this UI is still a little glitchy, it's displaying the information twice, but basically, and also another thing I should note is that I'm going to have all of the different C tiles be individually named, because, again, emphasis of the mod on sort of the quality over quantity since it's such a small area. Sort of like how all of the impassable terrains are named. These are all the actual names of what these impassable terrains would be. I have to do some localization edits on some of those, but basically sea tiles will be individually named. So Eastern Saronic Gulf is this specific sea tile, which, by the way, makes it easier to communicate in the code, or in the kind of description that I'll present in the mod for the code of how the long wall mechanic works. That it'll say something like, if you don't have a navy physically in the Eastern Saronic Gulf, then the long wall mechanic can be ended through a blockade by having a enemy navy in that tile. So it's saying like the tile Eastern Saronic Gulf specifically, as this is specifically the sea tile that Piraeus has its port at. It makes sense. So basically, putting that aside, if you didn't notice, the change that I've made is what this would normally say is arriving at Eastern Saronic Gulf on, and then it would show the ABC date. So what I've changed it to is moving to location. And this is also the same with land armies. So let me just quickly raise an army in Piraeus and tell it to move over to Anigrius. So you can see here moving it to Anigrius. Now, so the movement is actually the same. I've not changed mechanically since a long time ago when I rebalanced the movement. Movement in this mod is quite fast to be more historically accurate to the small scale of the mod. But basically, the actual movement rate isn't changed, but the information displayed to you is different. Now, this is quite a big difference, and it will give the AI, in some ways, quite a bit of information asymmetry, because the AI will know the duration amount for all movements, while you, the player, will not. I actually think this is an interesting change to this game's interface design, as, in my opinion, it actually is more realistic that you don't exactly know when your force would arrive at a location. I mean, you're going to have a general idea, but as you play this mod and you get familiar with the terrain and you really think about the mechanics that would affect movement, for example, if you're moving through rough terrain, if you're moving on a road, if you're moving to a very distant terrain tile that's large, you're going to be able to kind of, in your own head, guess how these things will be different. And I think that it's actually not a huge loss to lose this specific information, and the clarity for everybody of not having the conflicting dates being displayed, I think is worth it to miss out a little bit on that information. So this is quite a big change that I think is going to be felt quite a bit as you play. It's one of those sort of game feel changes that on sort of, when you just look at it, doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but the loss of that really precise information of when actions are occurring when it comes to movement is going to be something that I think is going to be a little disorienting at first, but I think ultimately it will lead to a bit more kind of sort of risk-taking behavior where you're not going to be able to necessarily have exact, precise knowledge of exactly how fast everyone's going to move. And of course, you know, when it comes down to things like will you arrive before or after something, there's other things in the interface like the battle pop-ups that show, which, although not always consistent, they should in theory allow you to still see if a battle will happen, if a battle won't happen. So I think it adds a little bit of intrigue into something that was previously not considered like a gamified mechanic. Like movement destination times were considered sort of plain and kind of not open for debate or not open for interpretation. So this reintroduces some ambiguity and actually makes the movement arrival time kind of a mechanic that you're engaging with, which is my long explanation for justifying this interface change, just to make my solid commitment to having the BCE dates be more consistent. So anyways, that is one change there. Now the real goal of this dev diary is to actually go down and show off the island of Crete, which is down here. Now, I talked in my Hegemony Discord about one of my sort of design visions for Crete in Hegemony. In real history, Crete as an island was more or less uninvolved. There were a few times where Cretan city-states did kind of interact with the leagues now and then, but essentially what was going on during the Peloponnesian period is that Crete was pretty internally focused on its own local affairs, and the various city-states on Crete used the distant Peloponnesian War more as something in the backdrop of their own regional squabbles to affect their position in Crete. So, for example, you know, a city-state in Crete might send a diplomat to like the Delian League and say, hey, you know, Atheni, we want to join the Delian League, although it wasn't because they cared at all about the Peloponnesian War. It was because they wanted Delian support, or the perception of Delian support, to leverage and improve their position in their purely regional conflicts on Crete. At the time of 431 BCE, although Crete has historically been the home of some very powerful civilizations, Crete is an island split between small, pretty low-profile city-states that don't really have an international presence, and really kind of declining, like barely clinging to their old Minoan greatness city-states, places like Knossos or Gortyna, which were once formidable and powerful maritime city-states, sort of a bit like actually Aegina is a good comparison, where by 431, especially as Atheni and the Delian League have historically in the last half century really established hegemony over the Aegean Sea. Any of Crete's former big like naval powers are really now not really in contention. So it's an island of small kind of local city-states and kind of fading has-beens, right? But of course, when you are playing as one of these Cretan city-states, you can turn things around. You can either lead your formerly unknown Cretan city-state to greatness, or try to revive one of these older, ancient city-states, and perhaps even try to recapture some of that ancient Minoan greatness, right? City-states like Knossos, Gortyna, and Prysos, Pitna. Some of these city-states have long histories and powerful legacies in Hellas. So, having kind of given that basic layout, one of the design goals for Crete is that it's going to be Hegemony's noob island. Now, this is a fun kind of reference to something in the Crusader Kings community, and I guess in some of the other Paradox games as well, where essentially, starting in Crusader Kings 2, new players were often encouraged to play on Ireland in Crusader Kings 2, which was considered a sort of noob-friendly environment to do a campaign for the first time, because it only had a couple of counties. It was kind of uninvolved in the broader world of Crusader Kings, so it was kind of isolated, a little bit isolated. And you could basically play like this little tiny version of a full campaign on Ireland and learn the mechanics that way without being dragged into, for Crusader King purposes, either the like dynastic mess of medieval England or the geopolitical nightmare that was the Holy Roman Empire on mainland Europe. And so this idea of a noob island location, I think, is also still true in Crusader Kings 3, which of course includes much of the same starting dates. And so with all that in mind, the reason why I think that I'm going to look at Crete as being Hegemony's noob island is that it's isolated, it is internally diverse, so you have a lot of different nations you can play as, and there is some diversity between them in terms of their different power levels, but none of them are truly and clearly the hegemon of all of Crete, right? And essentially, I'm going to lay out, and I haven't done the populations or cities yet, so just ignore where you're seeing cities on the map. It's the borders that I've done so far. I've also not done the flags yet, but the Crete in Hegemony is going to be an environment that I specifically tailor-make to be as accessible as possible to especially newer Imperator Rome players or people that want to maybe get comfortable with the Hegemony mechanics, as it is quite distant from all the action of the Peloponnesian War, and as historically the Cretans never really made Crete a front of the war, or never really got directly involved very often. You know, they were involved a little bit here and there, but mostly they were pretty uninvolved. I'm not going to really have anything in the events or the AI or the code for the AI of the other major Peloponnesian sort of participants that would involve Crete of their own accord. So you can play on Crete in a very kind of distant, island consolidation experience, and then you can choose to enter the Peloponnesian War once you're ready as a unified Crete, as a kind of like a regional power in control of Crete's 3 regions, and bring in some powerful land forces and naval forces that you can get organized by that point into the Peloponnesian War. And so it can put you in a position sort of like Argos, where you can choose to enter the war in an ahistorical way on the side that you want to support. But unlike with Argos, who's in the very middle of everything and sort of needs to choose a side sooner or later under pressure from all directions, over in Crete, you're far away from everything, but you're not necessarily super far away. We're not talking about, for example, the Corcyran colonies out here or whatnot, or the folks over in some Macedon area, where you're distant from sort of southern Hellas, but you're still involved in quite a lot of conflict locally. Over in Crete, really all that you're concerned about is what's happening on Crete. I guess technically some of the Delian Islanders could get involved, or Melos, who is actually a Peloponnesian Islander. But either way, Crete is going to be in Hegemony, specifically designed as a kind of more lower stakes area to play as, specifically to facilitate a campaign where you can learn the hegemony mechanics. As my work on the mod continues, I really have realized that I've really gone a little overboard with changing almost everything. But I think all my changes are in line with my overarching design goal of having this be a historically accurate and historically authentic mod, as the changes I'm making make this map more in line and make the mechanics more in line with the dynamics of classical Greece, which is ultimately my goal here. I'm trying not to just make changes for the sake of it. This game, as I've talked about before, is extremely complicated with a lot of different systems interacting, and so changing any one system kind of requires changing all of the other systems it interacts with to keep the balance from falling out of control. But anyway, so that is the design goal for Crete. It's going to be Hegemony's kind of noob island, and let's talk for a second about the way it's laid out here. So, regionally speaking, there are 3 regions. Paknes in the west, Masada in the center, and Lacynthos in the east. Now, historically speaking, all 3 of these regions are pretty similar. At the point of when this mod begins, Crete's legacy as the center of Minoan culture is really quite distant. Really, the only truly sort of surviving kind of Minoan cultural energy that has not been sort of subsumed by Doric and Attic cultural migration and sort of cultural diffusion is going to be found over in Lacynthos, where there's little pockets of Minoan culture, truly surviving Minoan culture, way tucked away in the corner over here. But by the time of this mod, Crete's legacy as the center of this ancient maritime empire and civilization is really quite a distant memory, and that's something that when you're playing as one of these Cretan nations, some of your missions and decisions will be kind of styled around reviving that kind of Minoan greatness, which could be pretty fun. Now, in terms of the provinces over in Lacynthos, we've got the Zetea province, the Eteocrete province, the Minoa province, which is where the name Minoa comes from, the Oraperio province, and the Chersonesos province. And in terms of the nations here, the most so what I would say is that most of the Cretan regions have a sort of similar dynamic where they've got kind of a duo of slightly more powerful city-states, but no one's really truly much stronger than the others around them. So here in the Lacynthos region, the most powerful city-states are Herapintna over here, with their capital right here, and then Prisos next to them. Now these are ancient rivals, and their rivalry is going to be in the mod as well. Neighboring them are Zakros, which is a bastion of surviving Minoan culture and is going to have some unique elements along those lines. Lato up here, Malia up in the north, and then the coastal city-state of Inatos, who also controls this kind of plateau area. So this is quite a rocky area. There's a little bit of nice terrain here and there, but this area is really dominated by mountains. It's this very sharp, rough peninsular area. And all of the city-states here are, except for Prisos, are coastal. Prisos is interesting for having been a powerful nation before, despite not being on the coast. It really was probably the region's most powerful city-state in the past, and I think that the most powerful city-state starting in this region is probably going to be Prisos. Now, heading in this direction, we've got the similarly named Priansos, but we've also got Knossos, probably the strongest Cretan city-state historically up to this point, and in the mod. We've got the other powerful sort of regional player of Gortyna, not as strong as Knossos, but definitely a solid power compared to them, and probably the second strongest Cretan city-state overall. Then we've got the city-state of Phaistos, and then we've got I can never say this right, Siveritos, and then we've got Tylissos up here, and Axos, and Eleutherna over here. Now, in terms of the regional layout, it's split into a couple provinces. We've got the Petiata province over here, which is in the control of Priansos. We've got the Gortins province, which is Gortina's province. We've got the province of Timbaki, which is split between Physos and Siveritos. And then up in the north, we've got the Eraklio province, where Knossos is located, the Malavisi province of Tylissos, and then the Milopotamos province, which is split between Axos and Eleutherna. So, interesting stuff. Also, Eleutherna is technically not a coastal city as well, but they can easily take Axos and make that their port city. And then over here in the Paknes region, and one thing I should mention as well about Masara actually is that it's a bit more fertile. There's quite a few rivers flowing around here, and some of the great ancient civilizations of Crete are found in this region. Gortina is definitely not coastal, and they did quite well. But Knossos, who is coastal on farmland on a river, and in a great strategic location for the greater kind of Aegean Sea, they definitely are the most powerful ancient Cretan city-state. And I think if you want to just play as the the Cretan city-state with the most unique mechanics and most unique kind of mission stuff, it's probably going to be Knossos, most likely, in this mod. But heading over here to the region of Paknes, split between the Wasilios region, the Suda region, the Madaris region, which includes the island of Kaudos, and the Khania region up here. Now, in terms of the nations, we've got Rethymno over here on this kind of border between the regions, controlling. So they've got their capital up here at Rethymno, and then we've got Apteron over here at this little cape area. We've got Kydonia over here in quite a nice location as well. We've got Tados tucked away in this very safe mountain valley location. The island of Kaudos is uninhabited when the game begins, but it will be sort of colonizable, but it will be part of this province ultimately once it is colonized. We've got Malame up here, and then lastly on the extreme western end we've got Palerhenia over here. Now it was actually quite a lot of work to research what the classical age city-states were. We actually know much more about the Bronze Age sort of layout of Crete, because most of Crete's sort of civilizational greatness was during the Bronze Age. And we actually know a lot less about where more recent classical age city-states were really located. So some of this is definitely speculative. If you happen to know a lot about Crete during the Peloponnesian War, please let me know if my map is accurate or if there are some additions I should make. There probably were more Cretan polises that I didn't catch when I was doing my research or that I overlooked. But in terms of the balance of Crete for the mod, I think this is pretty good. I'm happy with the density. This feels like a good set of regions to basically act as this mod's new island, where there are multiple regions. Actually conquering and controlling and running Crete will be like an entire early game project to do that first. And then using Crete as a jumping off point for getting involved in the war is going to feel really cool, because then you're going to have your island home that you're launching away from. And if you're, because all of the Cretians start as unaligned, even though no one's directly involved in the Peloponnesian War, you're not far away from many of its main theaters. We've got the Lacedaemon nearby, with the island of Aegila, which is uninhabited, but it is part of the Cythera province, being something that Lacedaemon may try to colonize. And Lacedaemon, of course, is also just not very far away at all beyond that. And then the very Delian-centric, again with the exception of the Peloponnesian Melos, the Delian-centric Cyclades island chain. So there's definitely going to be a lot of Peloponnesian War activity happening around you. And I think that in many ways, the mechanics for Crete and like the sort of special circumstances of Crete are going to be about trying to use the chaos of the Peloponnesian War to help you get the edge up over your mostly similarly powerful neighbors, or similarly not powerful neighbors on Crete, where everyone's going to have a similar population. Again, nations and city-states like Knossos and Gortina are going to be a little stronger, but not much stronger. And there's no guarantee that Knossos is going to easily conquer all of Crete in 50 years or something, you know what I mean? So that's basically the idea for Crete and its implementation in Hegemony. And I'm definitely pretty excited to hear your feedback in the comments below. about the way I've laid out Crete and some of the other changes that I've talked about in this dev diary. Again, everything in this dev diary has actually already been discussed on the Hegemony Discord, link in the description, but this is hopefully a concise restatement of all that, especially for those of you that just catch these on YouTube and don't follow on the Discord, which is more than fair, as these YouTube videos are probably a little easier to get through than my many long and sort of disorganized posts over on the Discord. But either way, that basically wraps it up for this developer diary. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.